There are moments in life when silence becomes more difficult to bear than words. You pray, you ask, you wait, and yet what returns is not an answer you can recognize, only silence. And slowly, that silence begins to feel heavier than anything else. But what you are experiencing is not emptiness, it is interpretation. Because the human mind struggles when it cannot immediately connect action to response. So it fills the gap with assumptions. It starts to believe that silence means absence, that waiting means rejection, that delay means denial. Yet what if none of that is true? What if silence is not a sign that something is missing, but a space where something is being formed beyond your current awareness? There are processes in life that do not announce themselves while they are happening. They do not produce immediate evidence. They do not offer emotional confirmation. They simply unfold in a dimension you cannot fully access yet. And this is where inattention begins, not because nothing is happening, but because you cannot see what is happening. In these moments, faith is no longer supported by visible signs. It is tested in the absence of them. And that is where something deeper begins to form within you, even if it feels uncomfortable. Because silence removes distraction. It removes certainty. It removes the illusion that you are in control of timing. And when those layers fall away, you are left with something more honest. The raw state of trust without immediate validation. If you're still here, still holding on, even without clear answers, then something within you is already stronger than the need for immediate understanding. And this is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of learning how to remain present without requiring constant confirmation that you are being heard. And what comes next will show you why what feels like silence may actually be the first language of something greater unfolding in your life. There is a kind of suffering that does not come from what is happening, but from how you interpret the time it is taking. Because the mind has a natural tendency to measure life through speed. It wants movement, answers, confirmation. And when those things do not arrive quickly enough, it begins to label the experience as delay. But delay is not always real. Sometimes it is only perception shaped by expectation. You expected a certain outcome by now. A change, a breakthrough, a shift. Something visible that confirms that everything you have been through was not in vain. But instead of that confirmation, you are still in process. And this is where internal conflict begins, not because life has stopped, but because your expectation of timing does not match the timing of what is unfolding. But there is something important you're not being told by your urgency. Not everything that takes time is delayed. Some things are being prepared in layers you cannot access through impatience, because what is meant to last cannot be rushed into fragile form. It must be formed through depth, not speed. And depth often requires a kind of waiting that does not feel productive in the moment, but is essential for what is being built within you and around you. Your soul does not measure progress the way your mind does. Your soul recognizes formation, even when nothing external confirms it yet. And this is where a shift begins to happen inside you. A slow questioning of the belief that time is working against you. What if time is not against you at all? What if it is working within a structure you do not yet fully understand? If you are still here, still moving through this experience instead of abandoning it, then something deeper than impatience is already beginning to form in you. And that something is the ability to remain steady even when timing does not match expectation. And what comes next will reveal why what feels like delay is often not a blockage, but a deeper alignment taking place beneath what your mind can currently perceive. There is a type of exhaustion that does not come from what you do, but from what you carry silently while continuing to function. On the outside, you may appear fine. You may continue your routines, respond to life, fulfill responsibilities. But internally, there is a weight that does not leave your thoughts even when everything looks normal from the outside. This weight is not always caused by a single event. It is often the accumulation of unspoken emotions, unanswered questions, and internal battles that never had a place to be fully expressed. And because it is invisible to others, it often becomes invisible to understanding as well. You start to adapt to carrying it, not because it becomes lighter, but because you become used to holding it while continuing to move forward. But adaptation is not the same as release. And this is where something begins to quietly affect your inner world. A sense of being present in life, but not fully relieved within it. Yet even here, something important is happening. Because carrying what is heavy, without collapsing under it, reveals a strength that is not loud, not celebrated, and often not even recognized by you in the moment. It is the strength of continuing without full emotional clarity. The strength of staying engaged with life, even when parts of you feel unresolved. And over time, this changes you in ways you do not immediately notice. You become more aware of what you are capable of enduring. But more importantly, you begin to question whether everything you are carrying is meant to remain with you in the same form forever. If you are still here, still moving forward, while carrying what others cannot see, then something within you is already learning that endurance is not the same as permanence. And what comes next will reveal why some of what you carry is not meant to define you, but to eventually be understood, released, or transformed into something you no longer have to hold in the same way. There are moments in life when giving up does not arrive as a dramatic decision. It arrives as a quiet thought, a subtle suggestion that maybe you are too tired to continue, that maybe nothing will change, that maybe it would be easier to stop expecting anything at all. But what is important is not that thought itself. It is what happened after it appeared, because something inside you did not fully agree with it. Even in exhaustion, even in confusion, even in emotional heaviness that made everything feel distant, there was still a part of you that remained present. Not loud, not fully certain, but still there. And that presence is not random. It is often in your lowest moments that you discover you are not only defined by what you feel in the surface layer of your emotions. There is something deeper in you that does not surrender as quickly as your thoughts might suggest. This is where a quiet contradiction appears within your experience. You can feel like you're at your limit and still continue. You can feel uncertain and still remain. You can feel tired and still not fully disconnect from your path. And this is not denial. It is endurance that you do not fully recognize in yourself yet, because endurance is not always loud determination. Sometimes it is simply the continuation of presence when everything inside you is asking for escape. And in that continuation, something important is being revealed. You are not only someone who reacts to difficulty, you are someone who remains within it long enough to discover another layer of yourself. If you are still here, still engaging with this process, even after moments of inner collapse, then something within you has already proven that your story is not as fragile as your lowest thoughts might suggest. And what comes next will reveal why the moments where you almost give up are not signs of ending, but often the exact points where something deeper within you begins to quietly take shape. There is a stage in inner transformation where nothing feels elevated, peaceful, or enlightened. Instead, it feels confusing, heavy, sometimes even emotionally unstable. And because of that, many people assume nothing spiritual is happening at all. But this is one of the most misleading perceptions in any journey of growth, because real transformation does not always arrive with clarity. Often it arrives as disruption before understanding. There are moments when your internal world begins to reorganize itself, but your awareness has not yet adjusted to the change. Old thoughts still appear, old emotions still surface, old patterns still try to return, and this creates the illusion that you are going backward, when in reality, something deeper is being restructured beneath the surface. This is where the process feels unfamiliar, because what is being removed is not always immediately replaced with something clearly visible. Instead, there is a phase of internal clearing, a phase where what no longer aligns begins to lose stability within you. And that instability can feel like confusion, even though it is actually transition. You are not losing direction. You are losing attachment to what no longer fits the direction you are moving toward. But in the middle of it, you cannot always see that clearly. Because from the inside, transition often feels like disorder before it reveals itself as alignment. If you are still here, still staying with this process, instead of rejecting it because it feels uncertain, then something within you is already learning how to remain present even when understanding is not immediate. And this is a significant shift, because most people only trust what they can clearly interpret in real time. But transformation often requires staying inside what you cannot yet fully interpret without abandoning yourself. And what comes next will reveal why what feels like confusion may actually be the earliest stage of clarity, forming in a direction you are not yet able to fully see. There are moments in life when something within you begins to feel like it is coming apart, not in a dramatic way, but in subtle ways that slowly change how you see yourself, your direction, and even your sense of stability. And in those moments, it is natural to interpret what is happening as loss. But not everything that breaks is destruction. Sometimes, what is breaking is not your life, but the structure you were relying on to hold your life in place. Because certain internal frameworks are only strong enough for a previous version of you. They are built around old fears, old limitations, old definitions of identity that no longer match where you are being led. And when growth begins to exceed those old structures, tension appears. Not because something is wrong, but because something is no longer compatible. This is where discomfort arises, because what once felt stable no longer feels sufficient, and what is being formed has not yet fully taken shape. So you find yourself in a space between what is dissolving and what is still becoming. And that in-between space can feel uncertain because it does not offer immediate replacement for what is being released. But this is not abandonment. It is reconstruction, because what is being built within you requires space that cannot exist while older structures are still fully intact. And so what you experience as breaking is often the beginning of realignment. If you are still here, still allowing yourself to move through this process instead of resisting it completely, then something within you is already adapting to a deeper form of transformation that does not depend on external stability to continue. And what comes next will reveal why certain forms of breaking are not signs of collapse, but necessary openings for something stronger, more aligned, and more enduring to take shape within you. There are moments when loss does not feel like guidance. It feels like absence, like something important was taken away at the wrong time, without explanation, without preparation, without clarity. And in that space, the natural reaction is to focus on what is missing. But not every loss is a removal of something meant to remain. Sometimes, what leaves your life is not aligned with where your life is going next. Because growth does not only involve addition, it also involves release. And release is often the part that feels most confusing in real time. You may not immediately understand why certain doors closed, why certain paths stopped, or why certain connections faded. But what feels like interruption may actually be redirection at a level you cannot fully interpret yet. There are versions of you that were shaped by specific environments, relationships, and emotional conditions. And when you begin to outgrow those conditions internally, something begins to shift externally as well. Not because life is punishing you, but because coherence is changing. And in that change, what no longer matches your internal evolution begins to fall away. This is often difficult to recognize in the moment, because you are still emotionally connected to what is being released. But connection does not always mean alignment with your next stage. And so, what feels like loss may actually be protection from remaining in patterns that would limit what you're becoming. If you're still here, still moving through this process, even without full understanding, then something within you is already learning to trust beyond immediate interpretation. And that trust is not based on clarity. It is based on continued presence in the unknown. And what comes next will reveal why some losses are not endings at all, but quiet separations that make space for a version of your life that could not exist while the old one was still intact. There is a turning point in every spiritual journey where faith begins to feel different. Not because circumstances have improved, but because something inside you stops depending on circumstances to believe. At first, faith often moves with emotion. When hope is strong, belief feels natural. When signs appear, trust feels easier. When answers come, certainty feels alive. But there comes a stage where emotional reinforcement becomes less frequent, and something deeper is required to continue. And this is where faith begins to shift. It is no longer carried by how you feel in the moment. It is carried by a conscious decision to remain aligned with what you believe, even when the emotional support for that belief is not immediately present. And this shift is not comfortable at first, because it removes the automatic support system of feeling certain before continuing. Instead, you are asked to continue without that guarantee. And in that space, something important begins to develop. A different kind of strength, one that is not dependent on emotional validation, but on inner commitment. You begin to notice that belief does not disappear in uncertainty. It changes form. It becomes quieter, more stable, less reactive. And this is not the absence of faith. It is the maturation of it. Because emotional faith reacts to what is visible. But chosen faith remains even when nothing is visible. If you are still here, still continuing through this process, instead of withdrawing when feelings fluctuate, then something within you is already practicing a deeper level of trust than you may realize. And that trust is not based on evidence. It is based on persistence in what you have already decided within yourself. And what comes next will reveal why this shift from emotional dependence to conscious decision is not the weakening of faith, but the beginning of a more stable and enduring form of it that cannot be easily shaken by external conditions. There are moments when life appears completely still. No clear movement, no visible progress, no external sign that anything is changing in your favor. And in that stillness, the mind often assumes nothing is happening at all. But stillness is not emptiness, because not all movement is meant to be seen while it is unfolding. There are processes that develop in layers that remain hidden until they reach a point of completion. And during that time, from your perspective, it can feel like nothing is advancing. But perception is limited to what is visible. It does not account for what is forming beneath visibility. And this is where misunderstanding begins. You evaluate progress based on what you can immediately recognize, while deeper processes often operate outside of that range of perception. This creates a false sense of pause, when in reality, alignment may still be actively taking place. There are moments in life where conditions are being adjusted in ways you cannot influence or observe directly. Situations are shifting, timing is organizing itself, and internal preparation is occurring in parallel with external silence. And none of this requires your constant awareness for it to be real. But because you cannot see it, the temptation is to assume absence instead of unseen activity. And this is where trust becomes essential again. Not trust based on visible confirmation, but trust that allows for processes beyond perception to still be valid. If you're still here, still remaining within this experience instead of abandoning it due to lack of visible change, then something within you is already learning to hold uncertainty without collapsing into doubt. And that is a deeper form of stability than immediate answers could ever provide, because you are beginning to understand that what is happening around you is not always a reflection of what is not happening within a larger process. And what comes next will reveal why periods of stillness are often not pauses in progress, but hidden stages of preparation that only become clear once their outcome begins to unfold. There is a kind of understanding that does not arrive in the moment you are living through the experience. It only becomes clear after distance has been created between you and what once felt confusing. And this is why waiting often feels heavier while you're inside it than it does when you look back on it. Because in the present, you only see fragments. You feel the uncertainty, but you do not yet see the structure behind it. You experience the delay, but you do not yet understand the formation taking place within it. But life has a way of revealing meaning gradually, not all at once. And there will come a moment where you look back and realize that what you once called too long was actually the exact amount of time required for things to align in ways you could not have accelerated without breaking the process. You may not see it now, but timing is not random. It is often structured around readiness, not desire. And readiness is not only about external conditions, it is also about internal capacity, emotional stability, mental clarity, spiritual alignment, the ability to hold what you once only wished for. Because receiving something before you are prepared to carry it can create imbalance, even if it arrives earlier than expected. So what felt like delay may have been protection from arriving too early into something you were still becoming capable of handling. And one day, that realization will not just be intellectual, it will be deeply understood within you, not as explanation, but as recognition. if you're still here, still moving through this process without full answers, you're continuing anyway, then something within you is already developing the patience to one day see your own story with clarity instead of confusion. And what comes next will reveal why understanding often arrives after transformation, not before it, because clarity is usually the result of time, having already completed what it needed to form within your life. There is a stage in the journey where something inside you begins to loosen its grip on how life should unfold. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you begin to recognize the limits of your control. For a long time, control may have felt like safety. Planning, predicting, preparing, trying to anticipate outcomes before they arrive. It creates a sense of structure and uncertainty. But life eventually reaches a point where control is no longer enough to guarantee peace. And this is where internal tension begins to surface. Because you can do everything right and still not be able to determine the outcome. And in that experience, something important starts to happen. You begin to separate effort from certainty. You realize that effort does not guarantee timing, and preparation does not guarantee predictability. And this realization, while uncomfortable, opens a deeper space within you. Because when control starts to lose its ability to secure emotional stability, trust begins to take its place. Not blind trust, not passive surrender, but a deeper trust that continues even when outcomes are not visible or immediate. And this kind of trust is not built in moments of certainty. It is formed in moments where certainty is not available. If you are still here, still remaining present within this process, instead of retreating into control-driven responses, then something within you is already learning how to exist without needing to manage every outcome in order to feel safe. And this is a significant shift, because you are no longer only trying to direct life. You are beginning to learn how to move with it without forcing it to conform to your timing. And what comes next will reveal why the release of control is not loss of direction, but the beginning of a different kind of guidance that cannot be accessed through force, only through trust developed over time. There are moments in life where nothing dramatic happens on the outside, but everything begins to shift in the direction of your path. And because there is no clear interruption, no obvious ending, no visible reset, you may not recognize that something new has already begun. But not all beginnings announce themselves. Some restarts are quiet, subtle, almost invisible while they are happening. They do not erase your past. They reorganize it. They take everything you have lived through and begin to reposition its meaning in relation to where you are going next. And in this process, something inside you starts to feel different, not fully new yet, but no longer fully attached to what was. This in-between state can feel uncertain, because you are no longer standing in the same emotional place, but you have not yet fully arrived somewhere else. And that space is where transformation often goes unnoticed, because you are still living your life, still going through routines, still experiencing familiar surroundings, but internally the direction is no longer the same. There is a shift in alignment that does not require external disruption to begin. And this is why many people miss it while it is happening, because they expect change to look like endings. But sometimes change looks like continuation with a different internal direction. If you are still here, still allowing yourself to move through this process instead of resisting its quiet shifts, then something within you is already adjusting to a new path that does not require dramatic signs to be real. And this adjustment is important, because it means your life is no longer only repeating patterns. It is beginning to reorient itself towards something that is not fully visible yet, but already in motion. And what comes next will reveal why some of the most important redirections in life are not experienced as interruptions, but as subtle internal shifts that only become clear once you realize you are no longer where you used to be. There is a stage in this journey where motivation fades, emotional intensity lowers, and even hope does not feel as strong as it once did. And in that space, it can feel like something is missing. But what is actually happening is not absence. It is a different form of development that does not rely on emotional stimulation to exist. Because there is a kind of strength that is not felt in moments of inspiration, but in moments of continuation without emotional reinforcement. You keep moving forward, not because everything feels aligned, but because something deeper than feeling is still guiding your presence. And this is where the nature of strength begins to change. It is no longer about how strongly you feel in the moment. It becomes about how consistently you remain even when feeling is not supporting you. And this kind of strength is often invisible while it is forming. Because it does not produce emotional excitement. It produces stability in silence. You begin to notice that even when inner motivation is low, your ability to continue does not disappear completely. And that continuation is not accidental. It is evidence of something within you that is no longer dependent on emotional peaks to remain engaged with life. If you are still here, still present within this process, even when nothing feels particularly strong or emotionally charged, then something within you is developing a form of resilience that is not based on feeling, but on presence itself. And this resilience is important because it means your journey is no longer only driven by emotional waves. It is beginning to be sustained by something more stable and internal. And what comes next will reveal why continuing without feeling is not emptiness, but the beginning of a deeper form of inner solidity that does not collapse when emotions are quiet. There is a final realization that does not arrive as a sudden answer, but as a quiet understanding that settles inside you over time. Everything you have been through, everything you have questioned, everything you have waited for, begins to take on a different meaning when seen from a wider perspective, because what once felt like silence was never truly absence. It was formation. What once felt like delay was not necessarily blockage. It was alignment in progress. And what once felt like breaking was not destruction. It was preparation for something that required a different version of you to carry it. And now, as you reach this point in the journey, something within you may not feel dramatically changed on the surface, but internally, perception has already shifted. You are no longer only interpreting life through immediate outcomes. You are beginning to recognize patterns beneath what is visible. You are beginning to sense meaning even in what does not yet have explanation. And this shift is not small, because when perception changes, everything that follows is experienced differently. If you are still here, still reflecting on this journey instead of dismissing it, then something within you is already anchored in a deeper kind of awareness, one that does not depend entirely on immediate confirmation to remain steady. And this is where the message settles into its final truth. Not everything that feels impossible is blocked. Some things are still in the process of becoming ready for you and you for them. And when the right moment arrives, you will not only understand the waiting, you will understand what was being built inside you while you were waiting. And in that understanding, everything begins to make sense in a way that could not have been revealed earlier. Because some answers are not given in the moment of seeking. They are revealed in the moment you're finally ready to see them.